Well, hello again. Pastor Ray Barnett here with you, and I'm glad that you could be with me right here on the Oasis, formerly known as God's Answers for Anxiety and Depression. As always, I wish you a good morning, a good evening, or a good afternoon, depending on what time you're watching this broadcast. Today, as you can see, I'm down here by the brook or the creek or the lazy river, whatever it may be in the final analysis. And it is definitely a fall day. Most of the leaves, or at least half, are now off the trees. We've gone past peak season. And today the temperature is only upper 40s, mid 40s. I have two t-shirts on, sort of a kind of a fleece, and then my heavy leather jacket, obviously my hat. It's a bit nippy out. When this breeze is, as you can see, is blowing, or maybe you can't see. It's cold. Yet, living here in upstate New York, it's going to get a whole lot colder yet, that's for sure. All right, that may be a good way to introduce today's topic. Taking one day at a time. I mentioned to you before that these old adages and axioms and sayings, if you think about them, they really do have some significant meaning. They're really kind of profound. One that comes to my mind is the more haste, the less speed. If you've ever fumbled around rushing because you're late or want to get something done and get it over with, you may find out, if you actually look at your watch, that the more you rush, you're actually getting less done and it's taking longer. Slow down. Well, it's not easy when you're in a hurry or when you're frustrated, and this happens to me quite frequently, believe me. So I always say, okay, now take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and slow down. And I do. And it works. But there's a saying, one day at a time, which actually has a biblical basis. Jesus said, take no thought for the morrow. In fact, it'd be easier if I just paraphrase it for you. Take no thought for tomorrow will take care of the things of itself. Sufficient for the day is the evil thereof. That's the words of Jesus. And that's his advice to you and to me. Now, the word thought does not mean, and I have covered this once before, the word thought does not mean you're not making plans for the future. You're not making plans for your retirement. You're not making plans for your vacation. You're not making plans for employment, school, and so on. That's not what he's talking about. The Greek word, as you know, the New Testament was written in Greek, Koine Greek. The Greek word underlying our English word for thought is the word anxiety. So what Jesus was saying was, don't take any anxious thought. In other words, don't have anxiety about tomorrow, for tomorrow's going to take care of itself. And again, to maybe paraphrase with commentary, you have enough to deal with today. Now again, this is coming from Jesus, who's not simply a teacher, he's not just simply a rabbi, he's not simply a philosopher. He's the Son of God. He's completely God. He's 100% God. He's God. But he's also 100% man. That's Christian theology. That's what the Bible teaches. So when God tells us, don't be anxious about tomorrow and the day after and the week after that, month after that, what's going to happen next year, all of this. God is he is, you could say it's a commandment, but it's really an exhortation. Don't be thinking so much with anxiety about what's going to happen next? What's going to, what's tomorrow going to be like, and the day after, and next week? I have a saying that I use, and it does have biblical basis, but I use this phrase with people when I'm talking to them. I always say this, that life has a way of resolving itself if you just leave it alone. Meaning, of course, I'm really talking about God. God has a way of working things out that He's not prepared, or I should say, He's not able to give us the whole scope of what's going on in even our individual life, let alone world events and things going on in the world. He's not able to explain it all to us. So He simply says, listen, just not worry, but just think about today, just get through today, and don't be anxious in your thinking about tomorrow. Again, He's not saying don't make plans for all these things that I've already mentioned and other things. He's saying don't be anxious about it. And yet, it's in our nature as human beings to be anxious. My observation, as I listen to people, the pundits here on YouTube and other places, and I listen to people just in general speak about tomorrow and the future, it's filled with anger, it's filled with anxiety, it's filled with fear, it's filled with trepidation, mixed with their own predictions and predictions that they've heard others state. Yet Jesus says, don't take any anxious thought. And once again, He's not saying don't make plans. He's not saying even don't respond to the conditions that are here, because sometimes you can just figure out that if we're going in this direction over here, well, then we're going to end up right over there. Okay. But He's saying don't be anxious about it, and take it one day at a time. Now, you will recall, those of you who've been with me some time, you will recall that I have shared with you many times what I teach on this broadcast are simple principles. They are very, very simple, not difficult to understand. But almost every single one of them is somewhat difficult, and in some cases very difficult, to put them into practice. To tell someone who's habitually anxious, just get through today. Don't think so much about tomorrow. It's simply said, but it's not simply done. And tragically, in most cases, well, I wouldn't say most cases, but many cases, it's not done at all. When you're feeling the intense symptoms of anxiety, thinking it's, heart attack, thinking you're losing your mind, that's a symptom, of course, of anxiety. I'm losing my mind, what's going on? Well, it's natural to be anxious, obviously, about what's going to happen to me next, what will become of me. That's all natural, and you shouldn't really blame yourself because you do feel that way or you do think that way. That's just natural. But then the calm exhortation of Jesus saying, don't be anxious about tomorrow. Don't be taking so much anxious thought about tomorrow. Get through today. Tomorrow will take care of itself. And He also says that, basically He says that today's going to take care of itself. Life has a way, God has a way, of resolving things if you just leave them alone. And what I mean by that is there are many things that we put our hands to that we either, first of all, have no business being involved in, or secondly, we should tread lightly, thirdly, just go slowly, and so on. Some things are, you're involved in because you're a leader in your home. I'm a leader in the church and in my home, and maybe a few other places where I show up. But the anxiety part of it, that's coming from thinking too much. So I've told you this before. many of the people, I think the great majority of people that I have met who have some type of anxiety, depression, and so on, are very intelligent people. And that's the truth. They're not below average when it comes to intelligence. But the intelligence has been misapplied. I started to study a few years back now the classical guitar. I've been playing guitar since I was about 21 years old. Drums I started when I was 10, and I've been singing for decades. When I started to play the classical guitar, it was a much more involved than I anticipated. Sight reading is something most guitarists don't do, or they don't do it well. So there's sight reading. Here's a sheet of music, go home and learn it. You have right hand technique, you have left hand technique, and then almost an infinite amount of shades, tones, and colors that the classical guitar can produce. Well, when I began to think about it, I said, I don't have all the time and I don't have the time to study this, so I just put it down after a couple of years of studying. Instead of doing what I told you a week or so back, instead of saying, okay, this is going to be a long haul, and I'm never going to be able to accomplish what I probably could have accomplished had I started when I was very young. I mean, studying classical guitar. And I realize now that that was a mistake, because intelligence, and this was the point I wanted to make, my intelligence was able to figure out that in order to be really proficient the way I'd like to be proficient, I don't have the time. So they gave it up. Just recently I took it back up again and said, if I put in even 20 minutes a day, that's going to be a whole lot better than nothing at all. You see the difference? I had what may be called, for purposes of this broadcast, an anxious thought about my desire to be proficient at classical guitar. And in my haste of thinking things through, I wasn't even discouraged. I just gave it up, saying, I just don't have time for this. Then, years later, and I'm studying now, and I'm studying again and practicing again, I realized that, if I had put in, let's say, an hour a day, 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day, would have been a whole lot wiser decision than giving it up altogether. What things have you given up on because you're thinking too much into tomorrow? You're thinking too far down the road. You're taking anxious thoughts about tomorrow, when Jesus said, don't take any anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to take care of itself. Today has enough troubles to be sufficient. Get through today. And I want to give you one more thing before I pray for you. I have learned during days when there's a lot on my mind, maybe a lot to do as well, both, I look at my watch and say, you know what? I'm just going to look from here till lunchtime. There have been times I've been so overwhelmed with things that I say to myself, okay, you know what? Just put everything aside in your mind for the next hour. And if on those days when I just take it hour by hour, the hour goes up, so okay, now put that out of your mind for another hour, and so on. The day goes much better than if I'm trying to do this and I'm thinking about that, and how's this going to work out over here, and what about tomorrow, and all this. That's simply what we all know as anxiety. Just think about today. It'll take care of itself. And tomorrow, likewise, will take care of itself. Let me pray for you. Father, once again, I pray for my friends. I ask you to help them to calm down, to settle themselves, and not to be anxious for anything, but just to live and to take it one day at a time. Amen. All right, I'm glad that I can be with you today. I'm glad that you were with me. Starting to get a few raindrops here on this cold fall day. But I'd like to give you an invitation to join our small group here. We have a good group of people. We pray for each other, contact each other, and we live many, many miles apart, most of us. In fact, almost all of us. Different states, different parts of the United States, different parts of the world. If you'd like to join us, just hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit the notification button as well. And as always, I do appreciate the thumbs up. It keeps us on the radar here at YouTube. And God willing, and the creek don't rise, I will be with you here again tomorrow on The Oasis. God bless. See you then.